Welcome to a channel dedicated to narrating history. Our purpose is understanding. We take complex, often contested pasts and present them with clarity, care, and fidelity to the sources. We will explore History of the Jews in Russia and Poland by Simon Dubnow. Listen carefully, follow the record, subscribe, and follow the story. To understand Jewish life in Russia and Poland, we must first look far beyond the borders and identities that exist today. We return to a time when Eastern Europe was still forming, when trade routes mattered more than frontiers, and when communities were defined not by nations, but by movement and memory. In the opening chapter, the narrative travels back to the earliest traces of Jewish presence in the Slavic lands. Small groups of merchants and settlers appear along the great commercial arteries linking the Black Sea, Byzantium, and the interior of Eastern Europe. These early communities were not yet rooted in cities or protected by law. They lived by trade, learning, and adaptation, interacting with Slavic peoples whose political and cultural structures were still emerging. This chapter lays the groundwork for the long Jewish experience in the region, showing how coexistence, exchange, and uncertainty shaped the first settlements. The second chapter shifts forward to the rise of Poland as a growing political power. As the Polish state expanded, it sought stability, economic growth, and skilled populations to develop its lands. Within this context, Jewish communities began to find firmer ground. Royal charters granted protection, legal recognition, and limited self-rule, allowing Jewish life to organize itself through communal institutions and religious authority. These early guarantees did not erase vulnerability, but they created the framework that would allow Jewish culture, scholarship, and communal autonomy to flourish in the centuries ahead. Together, these opening chapters form a return to beginnings, a reminder that Jewish history in Russia and Poland began not in isolation, but in motion, shaped by opportunity, negotiation, and the fragile promise of belonging. Chapter 3 turns to the legal position of Jews in medieval Poland, examining the charters, privileges, and limits that shaped their lives. And with that, we step forward, eager to discover what comes next. Chapter 3. At the dawn of the 16th century, while the echoes of expulsion still rang across Western Europe, Jewish life was once again on the move. From the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain and Portugal had driven out their Jewish populations through decree, exile, and fire, long caravans of refugees turned their faces eastward toward the Ottoman lands. At the same time, another current of migration unfolded more quietly, but no less decisively. From the cramped ghettos of the German and Austrian cities, where restrictions tightened and economic air grew suffocating, Jewish families began to drift toward the Slavic East, toward the wide plains and forested towns of Poland and Lithuania. This was an age of great transformation, shaped by the religious upheavals of the Reformation, which shattered the unity of Western Christianity and destabilized long-established social orders. In this unsettled world, Eastern Europe became a place of gathering. During these decades, Poland and Lithuania witnessed the rise of a vast and remarkably organized Jewish center, one that would become the heart of Jewish life in Europe for generations. The 16th century was marked by the relocation of Jewish civilization itself. Once flourishing communities in Western Europe, battered by expulsions, legal ruin, and economic collapse, were transplanted to new soil. Some took root in the lands of Western Asia under Ottoman rule, while others settled across Eastern Europe. Yet these two eastern centers did not share the same destiny. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sephardic Jews, descendants of Spain, carried the memory of past greatness. Their cultural brilliance, once radiant in medieval Spain, slowly dimmed as their communities settled into the rhythms of the Near East. In Poland, however, a different story was beginning. The Ashkenazi Jews, shaped by centuries in Germany and Central Europe, arrived with renewed strength, population growth, and the promise of a culture still in the making. What had already become memory for the Sephardim was still hope for the Ashkenazim. Since the days of ancient Babylonia and medieval Spain, no land had offered such a concentration of Jewish energy or such room for autonomous development as Poland did in the 16th and early 17th centuries. This was not an accidental rise. For centuries, Jewish settlers from German lands had steadily moved eastward, town by town, village by village. By the time Poland emerged as a major political power, this quiet colonization had prepared the ground. What had once been a peripheral outpost of Jewish life now became its central stage. The Jewish population of Poland and Lithuania was neither crushed into a single despised caste, nor confined to a narrow economic niche, as had often been the case in Germany. Instead, it formed a broad and active social body, involved in nearly every branch of economic life. Jewish men and women could be found not only in trade and money lending, but also in production, manufacturing, agriculture, and rural management. Some worked the land itself, holding leases, farming fields, tending gardens, and raising crops. Others engaged in crafts, retail commerce, and transport. Wealthier Jews assumed roles of immense importance to the state. They leased tolls and customs duties, collecting fees on goods moving through the country. They farmed excise taxes imposed on wine and other widely consumed products. In doing so, they advanced large sums of money to the royal treasury, becoming indispensable to the crown. Many rose to prominence as financial agents of the kings, trusted for their liquidity, their networks, and their administrative skill. Each estate judged the Jews according to its own interests. Medieval prejudices had sunk deep into popular consciousness, and constitutional guarantees did not translate into humane treatment. Jews were valued when they were useful and attacked when they became inconvenient, since what benefited one class often threatened another. The Jewish population stood constantly between protection and persecution. Two forces within the state tended to favor the Jews, the monarchy and segments of the high nobility. Two others opposed them, the clergy and the urban classes. The kings of Poland, beyond the steady flow of taxes imposed on Jewish communities, personally relied on Jewish financiers. Tax farmers and estate tenants advanced enormous sums in return for leases, tying their fortunes directly to the royal treasury. Through this financial dependence, Jewish agents gained access to the court and, at times, leverage to defend their communities. The great magnates of the nobility also extended protection, though for reasons no less practical. Jewish leaseholders and managers brought order and profit to estates that aristocratic landlords often neglected or mismanaged. Jews acted as intermediaries between nobles and peasants, ensuring revenue and administration. This protection, however, was narrow and self-interested. The magnates cared little for the broader Jewish population whose daily labor sustained towns and villages far from noble estates. In contrast stood the urban population. Christian merchants and artisans, many of them of German origin, viewed Jews as rivals, threatening their economic survival. Municipal authorities imposed restrictions on Jewish residents, property ownership, and professional activity. Guilds enforced exclusions and at times unleashed mobs against Jewish neighborhoods. Even more dangerous was the hostility of the Catholic clergy, whose sermons and influence often translated into laws rooted in religious intolerance. From the clash of these forces emerged the unstable legal and social position of the Jews of Poland and Lithuania during the 16th and early 17th centuries. This was the era when Poland stood at the height of its political power, yet beneath the surface, tensions shifted constantly. As alliances changed and power moved from one estate to another, the fate of the Jewish population rose and fell with them, caught in the currents of a society both dependent upon and hostile to their presence. As the 16th century opened, the Jewish communities of the Polish Kingdom and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania found themselves, for the moment, standing on firmer ground. The rights that had been stripped from them during the final turbulent years of the 15th century were restored not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. The same ruler who had once driven them out now summoned them back. Alexander of the Jagiellonian dynasty, Grand Duke of Lithuania, had ordered the expulsion of the Jews from his Lithuanian territories in the year 1495. The reasons were never made fully clear, but the consequences were immediate and destructive. Trade faltered, revenue shrank, and the machinery of state finance began to creak. When Alexander ascended the throne of Poland in the year 1501, following the death of his brother, the reality of governing a vast and costly realm confronted him. 2 years later, in 1503, after consultation with the leading nobles of the kingdom, he publicly reversed his earlier decree. The Jews expelled from Dubnow and other Lithuanian cities were permitted to return. They were allowed to settle near the castles and in the same neighborhoods they had once inhabited. Their homes were to be restored, along with their synagogues, their cemeteries, their farms, and their fields. What had been taken was to be given back. The reason lay not in mercy, but in the undeniable economic weight of the Jewish population, especially at a time when Poland and Lithuania had entered a closer political union. The royal treasury depended heavily on Jewish financiers who had the experience, networks, and capital required to sustain the state. Among these financiers stood a man named Yosko, a Jew of extraordinary wealth and influence. He leased customs and tolls across nearly half of the Polish kingdom, overseeing the flow of goods and the revenue drawn from them. To protect and encourage his services, King Alexander removed Yosko and his employees from the authority of local officials and placed them directly under the jurisdiction of the royal court, granting him a status similar to that of court dignitaries. Yet this special favor did not translate into general goodwill. Alexander remained cautious and, at times, hostile. In the year 1505, when the Polish Chancellor Jan Waski, known in Latin as John Lasky, compiled a comprehensive code of the kingdom's fundamental laws, Alexander permitted the inclusion of the ancient charter of Bolesław of Kahals. This charter, issued in the 13th century, had long served as the foundation of Jewish legal protection in Poland. But Alexander added a telling disclaimer. He insisted that its inclusion was not meant to reaffirm Jewish rights, but rather to serve as a safeguard for Christians against Jews. Even protection came wrapped in suspicion. A clearer change in tone arrived with Alexander's successor, Sigismund I, also of the Jagiellonian dynasty, ruled from the year 1506 to 1548 as King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. A devoted Catholic by faith, Sigismund nevertheless rejected the harsher strains of clerical hostility toward Jews. He publicly upheld the principle that justice should be applied equally to all, whether powerful, nobles, or the poorest subjects. In practice, such equality was difficult to enforce in a state dominated by the privileges of the nobility. But in one region, his authority still carried weight. That region was Lithuania, the ancestral domain of the Jagiellonian rulers. There, royal power remained broader and more personal than in Poland proper, where the nobility tightly constrained the crown. In Lithuania, Sigismund governed in a more patriarchal manner, and it was there that Jewish life benefited most directly from his policies. Jewish capitalists were entrusted with major tax contracts and land leases, ensuring a steady flow of revenue. One man, in particular, rose to exceptional prominence. Michael Yosefovich, the son of Joseph, a Jew from the city of Brest-Litovsk, became the general contractor of customs and state revenues in Lithuania. His responsibilities went beyond collection. At times, he effectively served as Grand Ducal Treasurer, paying the salaries of officials and settling the debts of the ruler himself. His position symbolized the deep interdependence between Jewish financiers and the state. In the year 1514, Sigismund took an unprecedented step, seeking both to reward Michael Yosefovich and to bring order to Jewish communal affairs. He appointed him as the official elder or senior of all Jews in Lithuania. This role carried sweeping authority. The senior could communicate directly with the ruler, administer justice among Jews according to Jewish law, and collect taxes on behalf of the state. He was to be assisted by a rabbi, referred to in official documents as a doctor, meaning a learned authority in Jewish law. When later restrictions narrowed Jewish involvement in tax farming, Jewish capital flowed into new channels. Jews leased royal and noble estates, gaining rights known as propination, which allowed them to produce and sell alcoholic beverages on those lands. They worked salt mines, managed forests for timber, and developed the natural resources of the soil. Large Jewish merchants exported Polish agricultural goods to neighboring regions such as Austria, the Danubian principalities of Moldavia and Wallachia, and the Ottoman Empire. At the lower levels of society, Jewish families sustained themselves through petty trade, handicrafts, vegetable growing, gardening, and, especially in Lithuania, even grain cultivation. This deep entanglement of Jewish labor with the economic life of the country shaped not only livelihoods, but law. Poland was a state defined by estates and classes, governed by a peculiar semi-constitutional system. Political power was divided among the monarchy, the landed nobility, the clergy, and the urban population. The king's authority was limited by an oligarchic constitution that granted immense privileges to the noble class known as the Schlachter. These nobles, in turn, were divided among themselves, struggling between great magnates and lesser landholders. Meanwhile, the towns were dominated by Christian merchants and craftsmen, organized into powerful guilds that guarded their privileges with fierce determination. These groups fought their battles in the national assemblies known as diets, in municipal councils, and in courts of law. Within this struggle, the Catholic Church pursued its own campaign. Weakened during the Reformation, it regained strength through the Catholic Counter-Reformation, led with relentless discipline by the Jesuit order, which sought to restore religious uniformity and suppress dissent. Yet the reality of this arrangement was complex. It is doubtful whether the Jewish communities fully recognized Michael Yosefovich as their supreme leader. Administration of Jewish law and communal life required scholarly training and spiritual authority, not merely royal favor. Michael's true role became that of an intermediary, representing Jewish interests before the throne, defending privileges, and negotiating fiscal obligations. Even so, his influence proved valuable. In this respect, Michael stood in sharp contrast to his brother Abraham Yosefovich. Abraham, also a tax farmer, chose a different path. He abandoned Judaism to advance his career. Under King Alexander, he was appointed starosta, or governor, of the city of Smolensk. Under Sigismund, he rose even higher, becoming chancellor of the Lithuanian treasury. In time, Abraham and his descendants were absorbed into the ranks of the Polish nobility, their Jewish origins fading into silence. Lithuania itself, largely agricultural and shaped by traditional patterns of life, had not yet developed sharp class antagonisms. Jews there moved with relative freedom, living in towns and villages, engaging openly in trade and labor. Cultural boundaries between Jews and Christians were still porous, less rigid than they would later become. Important Jewish centers emerged in Brest, Grodno, Pinsk, and Troki. Troki was notable for its population of Karaites, a distinct Jewish group that rejected rabbinic authority and maintained its own municipal administration. In the year 1531, the rabbi of Brest, Mendel Frank, received extraordinary authority from the king. He was granted administrative and judicial powers over his community, including the right to impose the herem, a severe form of communal ban or excommunication against those who defied communal law. This marked a high point of Jewish autonomy in Lithuania. The situation in Poland proper, however, was far less favorable. In the large cities, commercial life was more developed, competition sharper, and resentment more intense. Christian merchants and artisans, protected by municipal self-government under the Magdeburg Law, used their councils and guilds to limit Jewish economic activity. This struggle was particularly fierce in the major urban centers of Posen, Krakow, and Lemberg, capitals of Great Poland, Little Poland, and Red Russia, also known as Galicia. In Posen, city officials obstructed Jewish merchants, preventing them from conducting business freely or displaying goods outside the Jewish quarter. When Jewish leaders appealed to the king, Sigismund warned the municipal authorities not to violate Jewish privileges or impose undue hardship. The Christian merchants responded with a carefully framed protest. They claimed that Jews occupied the finest shops in the heart of the city and even on the central market square, a space they argued had traditionally belonged to prominent Christian merchants, both local and German. They further warned that the presence of Jews among large Christian crowds could lead to temptation and even religious seduction. This appeal to religious anxiety, thinly veiled as piety, resonated with the devout king. In the year 1520, Sigismund forbade Jews from maintaining shops on the market square. Further restrictions followed. Jewish residents were barred from purchasing food and goods in the market until Christian buyers had finished. As Jewish migration into Posen continued, the king ordered that no new Jewish settlers be admitted without special permission. Christians were prohibited from selling houses to Jews without approval from Jewish communal elders. Jewish residence was confined to specific quarters, and Jews were forbidden from building homes among Christian neighbors, a decree issued in the year 1523. Thus, even under a ruler inclined toward fairness, the balance between protection and exclusion remained fragile, shaped by pressure from powerful urban interests and the ever-present tension between economic dependence and social fear. In the city of Lemberg, known today as Lviv in western Ukraine, the tension between Jewish merchants and the Christian urban authorities reached a boiling point. The magistracy, composed of the city's elected burgomasters and aldermen, protested vigorously against the commercial activities of Jews, claiming that they were unfairly competing with Christian traders. In response to these complaints, King Sigismund I, ruling in the year 1515, restricted Jewish freedom in several important trades. Jews were barred from selling cloth anywhere in the provinces of Red Russia, which included the eastern borderlands of Poland and Podolia, a fertile region along the Dniester River, except at designated fairs. Their trade in horned cattle was also limited, capped at 2,000 head per year. These legal restraints were not isolated measures, but rather the culmination of persistent agitation led by devout Christian merchants who saw Jews as competitors in a mercantile world still governed by guilds and municipal councils. The Piotrków Diet, an assembly of nobles, clergy, and deputies, convened in the city of Piotrków in the year 1521, codified these restrictions, confining Jewish trade in Lemberg to only 4 commodities: wax, furs, cloth, and horned cattle. The city authorities of Posen, Lemberg, and Krakow, 3 major urban centers of the Polish kingdom, attempted to unite in a coalition aimed at collectively limiting Jewish economic influence. In Krakow and its suburb, Kazimierz, which had become a prominent Jewish quarter, restrictions were even more severe, squeezing Jewish merchants and craftsmen into ever narrower commercial corridors. Competition sometimes erupted into violence. Anti-Jewish attacks occurred with alarming regularity, particularly in Posen and in Brest-Kujawski, a town in northern Poland. In Krakow, fear of unrest loomed over the Jewish community. Concerned representatives of the Jewish quarter approached King Sigismund to warn him of impending riots. In the year 1530, the king issued a decisive decree. He condemned in the strongest terms the brazen acts of rioters who sought impunity for assaults on Jews, and imposed the severest penalties, including death and confiscation of property, for those who violated the law. To provide additional security, he required the burgomasters and aldermen of Krakow to deposit 10,000 gulden with the royal exchequer, a guarantee for the maintenance of peace. The magistrates and trade guilds were sternly warned to resolve disputes with Jews through lawful channels, not through violence, armed intervention, or incitement of public disorder. Despite these protections, royal authority had its limits. Jews remained vulnerable to the machinations of a class-ridden society, particularly the extortions and corruption of officials. The highest dignitaries of the court, as well as local administrators, often exploited disputes for personal gain. Queen Bona Sforza, the second wife of King Sigismund, an ambitious and financially shrewd Italian princess from the powerful Sforza family of Milan, openly sold state offices to the highest bidder. Courtiers and voyevodas, the provincial governors and military commanders, were no less venal. Peter Kmita, the voyevoda of Krakow and marshal of the crown, orchestrated a delicate dance of corruption. He accepted bribes from both Jewish and Christian merchants, each faction accusing the other, promising to represent the interests of both before the Diet or directly to the king. The resulting climate was one of constant negotiation, where survival and influence depended on personal favor and the ability to navigate a web of competing powers. By the fourth decade of the 16th century, the so-called Jewish question became a central point of heated debate at the Polish Diets, the assemblies where the kingdom's nobility and clergy convened to legislate. Deputies from several regions arrived with explicit instructions to pursue anti-Jewish measures. Yet the stance of the Polish nobility, the szlachta, was far from uniform. The great magnates, wealthy landowners controlling vast estates and even entire towns, often welcomed Jewish tenants, seeing in them an opportunity to enrich their domains. Jews, as leaseholders of estates and tax farmers, were valuable sources of income and administrative support. In contrast, the petty szlachta, minor nobles struggling for offices in the royal administration and civil service, allied themselves with the urban burghers who had long viewed Jewish competition as a threat. The lesser nobles resented the elevation of Jews to positions of financial authority, which had gradually afforded them influence akin to that of the nobility itself. The collection of taxes and customs, long regarded as the preserve of the aristocracy, now increasingly rested in the hands of Jewish contractors, an affront to the pride and expectations of the small szlachta. The Catholic clergy, too, perceived the growing role of Jewish financiers and merchants as a danger. To them, increased Jewish influence threatened the religious orthodoxy of the realm, undermining the spiritual authority of the church and opening the door to moral corruption. Meanwhile, the urban estates, including merchants and guild craftsmen, continued to press for restrictions, seeing economic opportunity slip from their grasp. Across Poland, the tension was palpable. Jews existed in a delicate balance, indispensable to the kingdom's finances, yet viewed with suspicion, resentment, and fear by much of society. Each law, each decree, each royal intervention rippled through their lives, shaping the limits of freedom, the scope of enterprise, and the precariousness of safety in a world where every class had its own interests, and every privilege came with its own threat. At the Piotrków Diet, held in the year 1538, the tensions that had been simmering for decades erupted into a dramatic assertion of power. The Diet, an assembly of the kingdom's nobles, clergy, and deputies, had become the arena where Jewish life was scrutinized, challenged, and ultimately constrained. Anti-Jewish agitation, carefully orchestrated by the urban burghers and supported by elements of the petty nobility, achieved remarkable success. The result was a statute, in the terminology of the time often referred to as a constitution, which, for the first time, contained a separate section explicitly regulating the affairs of the Jewish population. This section read like a formal indictment steeped in the language of divine and canonical authority. It decreed, in no uncertain terms, that all those entrusted with the management of royal revenues must be members of the landed nobility, the Schlachter, and profess the Christian faith. The Jews, by this law, were explicitly forbidden from serving as contractors for tax collection, tolls, or any other state revenues. The statute condemned such participation as unworthy and contrary to divine right, declaring it inappropriate for persons of the Jewish faith to assume any office or perform any public function among Christian subjects. In effect, centuries of Jewish financial involvement, which had been vital to the stability of the kingdom, were now officially curtailed. Commerce, which had been a lifeline for Jewish survival and prosperity, was similarly restricted. The law forbade Jews from engaging in trade except by special permission of the king or through explicit agreements with municipal authorities. In villages, Jewish trade was prohibited entirely. Pawnbroking and money lending, occupations often essential to the economic functioning of both towns and rural estates, were circumscribed by a web of oppressive regulations. Every transaction, every loan, every contract became subject to oversight, limitations, and fines. Perhaps the most humiliating and visible provision of the Piotrków Constitution was the imposition of distinctive clothing, a mandate aimed at marking Jews wherever they might appear. The statute explained that Jews had thrown off the marks by which they were distinguishable from the Christians and had adopted clothing that closely resembled that of their neighbors, creating confusion and, in the eyes of the lawmakers, a challenge to social and religious order. To remedy this, all Jews in the kingdom were required to wear special marks, usually a beret, a hat, or some other form of headgear made of yellow cloth, clearly setting them apart from the Christian population. An exception was made for travelers on the road who could conceal or remove such identifiers while in transit. The penalty for defiance was severe for ordinary people, a fine of 1 gulden, a substantial sum for many, imposed to enforce public visibility and social segregation. The Piotrków Diet of 1538 thus cast a long shadow over Jewish life. What had been a delicate balance between protection and participation now shifted sharply toward restriction and control. The Jews of Poland found themselves not only confined in their economic pursuits, but also forced into a visible, marked existence, a daily reminder of their precarious position in a society where law, commerce, and faith intersected in constant tension. In every town and village, in every market square, the statutes of the Diet echoed the message of the kingdom. The Jews were tolerated, but only on terms dictated by the powerful, and their freedoms were subject to the will of others. Their daily lives, framed by laws designed to enforce both distinction and subordination. The articles of the Piotr Constitution of the year 1538 that carried real weight for the Jews of the Polish crown, those living in Lithuania, were largely unaffected, were the prohibitions against tax farming and the severe limitations placed upon commerce. The requirement that Jews wear distinctive headgear while striking on paper was in practice almost impossible to enforce. The Jewish communities of Poland were highly educated, deeply integrated into the economic life of towns and cities, and played roles that could not easily be ignored. The regulation, therefore, served less as a practical law and more as a symbol, a warning issued under the watchful eyes of the Catholic Church. At this time, the Catholic clergy were on edge. The early successes of the Protestant Reformation in Poland, the movement challenging traditional church authority, had shaken clerical confidence. They feared that the influence of Judaism could fuel further heresy. In the minds of zealous priests and bishops, a new wave of so-called Judaizers was emerging, a sect inspired by rationalist teachings that rejected the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, which held that God existed as three persons in one essence: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. These fears were intensified by the appearance of anti-Trinitarian thinkers whose writings and doctrines questioned long-standing beliefs and suggested that God could not and had not been incarnated in human form. In this atmosphere of tension, an event in the city of Krakow, the royal capital of the province of Little Poland, sent shockwaves through the population. A Catholic woman named Catherine Zaleszowska, wife of an alderman, and then 80 years of age, was accused of secretly abandoning Christian belief and adhering to Jewish teachings. Her case exemplified the anxieties of the age, the fear that Judaism might corrupt Christian souls or lend support to the growing Reformation. The Bishop of Krakow, Peter Gamrat, a prominent ecclesiastical figure responsible for the spiritual oversight of the diocese, made repeated attempts to persuade her to recant. When these efforts failed, the Church pronounced the gravest sentence. Catherine was to be executed by burning at the stake, an event that took place in the year 1539, in the main market square of Krakow, where all citizens could witness the punishment. The Polish writer Lukas Gunicki, who observed these proceedings, provided a vivid account of her trial. Bishop Peter Gamrat had gathered the canons and collegiate clergy of Krakow to question Catherine on her beliefs. She was asked, according to Catholic doctrine, whether she believed in Almighty God, the Creator of heaven and earth. She replied with quiet firmness, declaring that she believed in God as the eternal being who governs all visible and invisible creation, incomprehensible to human reason, whose bounty extends to all creatures. When pressed about Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, according to Christian teaching, Catherine responded that God has neither wife nor son, that he is eternal and cannot be born, and that those whom God regards as his children are those who follow his ways. The assembled clergy were aghast. They shouted at her, accusing her of uttering evil, reminding her of prophecies that spoke of the Messiah who would be crucified to reconcile humanity to God. They pressed her further, insisting on the necessity of Jesus Christ for salvation. But Catherine stood firm, unwavering in her adherence to her interpretation of divine law. The more the learned men spoke, the more resolute she became. Her persistence left the church no choice in their eyes but to convict her of blasphemy. She was taken to the city jail, and after only a few days she faced the flames. Contemporary accounts emphasize the courage and composure she displayed. Lucas Gunitsky described her demeanor as fearless, while the chronicler Marcin Bielski, well known for his vivid depictions of Polish history, observed that Catherine approached death as if she were going to a wedding, embracing her fate with dignity and conviction. The spectacle left an indelible mark on the citizens of Krakow, demonstrating the intersection of religious zeal, social tension, and the precarious position of minorities in a kingdom caught between tradition, reform, and the ambitions of its rulers. In the shadow of these events, the Jewish communities of the Crown of Poland continued their delicate balancing act. While legally constrained by statutes like those enacted at Piotrków, and culturally scrutinized by both church and civic authorities, they also remained indispensable to the economy, skilled in commerce, finance, and management, and deeply woven into the life of the realm. Every day, every transaction, every negotiation was charged with tension, a reminder that in 16th century Poland, survival was inseparable from vigilance, strategy, and the ability to navigate a world in which law, faith, and power were constantly in conflict. During the same years, rumors swept through the towns and countryside of the Polish kingdom like wildfire. Whispers spread that in various locales, particularly in the bustling province of Krakow, many Christians were secretly abandoning their faith and embracing Judaism. It was said that these converts, after undergoing circumcision, fled northward to Lithuania, seeking safety among the Jewish communities there. Such stories, whether born of fear, envy, or exaggeration, reached the ears of King Sigismund I, who ruled from 1506 to 1548 as both King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. Alarmed by the implications of these tales, he dispatched 2 royal commissioners to Lithuania to conduct a thorough investigation. Among these were the stupendous Erroribus Judiorum, published in the year 1541, which catalogued the alleged errors of the Jews, and De Sanctis Interfectis a Judaeis, published in 1543, which recounted supposed acts of violence against Christian saints by Jewish hands. The Church took its campaign further. In the year 1542, the Synod, a formal assembly of bishops and other clerical leaders convened in Piotrków, issued a sweeping constitution aimed at regulating Jewish life. The text reflected the anxieties of the time. It warned that the large number of Jews in Poland, many of whom had fled persecution in neighboring lands, posed dangers to Christians and the Church. The Synod called on the king to take action. In particular, it demanded that the Jewish population in the Diocese of Gniezno, and especially in the city of Krakow, be limited to a fixed number, sufficient only to occupy districts previously designated for them. The document prohibited Jewish settlement in any place where they had not historically resided, and required that houses purchased from Christians be returned to their former owners. It ordered the demolition of newly built synagogues, including those recently erected in Krakow. The rationale as expressed in the Synod was chilling. The Church permitted the Jews to exist only to remind Christians of the sufferings of their Saviour, and under no circumstances should their numbers increase. Old synagogues might be repaired, but the erection of new houses of worship was strictly forbidden. The pressure from church authorities, combined with the vigilance of the Crown, created a tense and often dangerous environment for the Jewish population. Every rumor, every accusation, every complaint carried the potential for disruption, for punishment, or for outright violence. Yet, even under these threats, Jewish communities remained resilient, carefully navigating the treacherous waters of politics, commerce, and faith, striving to protect their families, their livelihoods, and their centuries-old traditions in a kingdom where suspicion and prejudice lurked in every corner. The anti-Jewish measures proposed by the Church in the early decades of the 16th century did not end with mere words. The Synod of 1542 added 7 more clauses, each designed to curtail Jewish autonomy and influence. Jews were forbidden to employ Christian servants in their households, especially nursery maids, on the reasoning that those who ought to serve Christians should not be allowed to gain authority or control over them. They were prohibited from acting as stewards of estates owned by the Polish nobles, the Szlachta, lest they acquire dominion or jurisdiction over Christian subjects. They could not work or conduct trade on Catholic holy days, and even on ordinary weekdays, selling goods publicly was restricted. The requirement to wear distinctive Jewish clothing, a mark that separated them from Christians, was repeatedly emphasized, a symbolic reminder of their perceived otherness. Despite the weight of this proposed legislation, it never gained formal legal sanction. Yet for decades, the Catholic clergy used it as a guiding framework, shaping policies and attitudes toward the Jewish population. These restrictions became a kind of wish list of the Church's prejudices. Some were eventually realized during the later period of Catholic reaction, when the Counter-Reformation sought to reinforce church authority and suppress any perceived heresy or dissent. When King Sigismund I passed from the throne in the year 1548, he was succeeded by his son, Sigismund II Augustus, a ruler noted for his culture, intellect, and a measure of liberal-mindedness. Sigismund Augustus, as he is often called in history, reigned until the year 1572, and his attitude toward Jews reflected the same principles of tolerance he applied more broadly to the non-Christian and non-Catholic subjects of the Polish kingdom. In the very first year of his reign, responding to petitions from the Jewish communities of Great Poland, he ratified at the General Diet of Poland convened in the city of Piotrków. The old liberal statute, originally enacted by King Casimir IV, who had ruled in the mid-15th century. In the preamble of this law, Sigismund Augustus confirmed the rights and privileges of the Jews, framing them as equivalent to those of the other estates of the realm, grounded in his royal oath to uphold the constitution. The Jewish communities were granted greater self-governance than ever before. The king bestowed extensive administrative and judicial powers upon rabbis and kahal elders, the leaders of Jewish communal organization. They were authorized to apply Jewish law, derived from the Hebrew Bible and the Talmud, in civil disputes and even in certain criminal cases involving Jews, beginning in the year 1551. In cases that reached the general voyevoda courts, the regional courts presided over by the royal governors or voyevodas, Jewish elders, elected representatives of the kahals, were required to participate, ensuring that the interests of the Jewish community were defended and that trials included a measure of fairness, at least in principle. This privilege, the exemption of Jews from the municipal or magistrates' courts where hostility and prejudice were rampant, was highly significant. However, it was limited to Jews living in the royal cities and villages, those under the direct protection of the crown. Jews residing on estates owned by the nobility, the hereditary Schlachter, remained subject to the jurisdiction of their landlords. Sigismund I had already decreed in 1539 that while nobles could profit from the presence of Jews on their lands, the king was under no obligation to ensure justice for them, since the royal treasury did not benefit from these populations. Sigismund Augustus confirmed a similar arrangement, extending royal privileges to Jews on noble estates only if they paid the special Jewish head tax to the crown, enacted in the year 1549. During the reign of Sigismund Augustus, the relationship between Jews and the third estate, the burghers, the urban merchant and artisan class, took on a more defined form. Compacts and agreements were established between Jewish kahals and municipal magistracies to regulate coexistence. In some cities, such as Krakow and Posen, these agreements strictly defined the boundaries of Jewish quarters or ghettos, outside of which Jews were forbidden to reside. In Posen, for example, the Jewish population was restricted to a fixed number of houses, forcing them to construct tall, multi-storied buildings to accommodate their families within a confined space. In other cities, including Warsaw, magistracies sought privileges known as de non tolerandis Judaeis, literally the right to refuse settlement of Jews. These regulations confined Jews to particular sections, allowed only brief stays for Jewish merchants conducting business, or excluded Jewish residents entirely. Yet, in the majority of Polish cities, the protection of the crown ensured Jews' rights equal to those of other townspeople. One royal edict of the period made this explicit. Inasmuch as the Jews carry all burdens in the same way as the burghers, their positions must be alike in everything, except in religion and jurisdiction. In some municipalities, the king even went so far as to forbid the holding of weekly market days on Saturdays, the Jewish day of rest, ensuring that Jews could safely conduct business without violating their religious observances. Under Sigismund Augustus, therefore, Jewish life in Poland became a delicate balance of royal favor, municipal restriction, and communal autonomy. Every law, every market ordinance, every agreement carried with it tension and negotiation. The Jews were simultaneously tolerated, restricted, protected, and constrained, a people navigating a complex world of privilege and prejudice, where economic vitality, political acumen, and spiritual resilience were inseparable from the everyday struggle for survival. With all the estates of the Polish kingdom, the Jews had managed to find a measure of accommodation, save only with the Catholic clergy. This body, unwavering and implacable in its hostility toward Judaism, redoubled its efforts as soon as Rome sent its clarion call for a counter-reformation, a vigorous campaign to suppress the rising tide of Protestantism and to stamp out all forms of non-Catholic belief. The policy of Pope Paul IV, the Supreme Pontiff, seated on the throne of St. Peter in the Vatican, resonated in Poland, stirring a wave of clerical zeal. The papal nuncio, Giovanni Battista Lippomano, dispatched from Rome to act as the Pope's official representative, conceived the idea of inflaming local Catholic fervor through one of the notorious public spectacles that the Inquisition occasionally staged. Theatrical executions meant to demonstrate the supremacy of the faith ad majorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. A rumor soon reached the towns and villages that ignited fear and fury. It was alleged that a humble woman of Sochachev, a small town in the eastern reaches of the kingdom, Dorothy Lazenska by name, had sold the sacred wafer of communion, the host, to the Jews of her town. According to the tale, the wafer had been pierced and had begun to bleed at the hands of these infidels.